Messerschmitt, Subaru 360, and a very uniquely colored BMW Isetta. What do all three of those cars have in common with the city of Nashville? If you said the Lane Motor Museum, you would be correct. Now, I have wanted to come here for years, just never got around to it. And it's kind of famous for microcars. Jeff Lane seems to have very much of a taste for these things. But now that I've taken a look at this place, there's a lot more than microcars. So I think you and I should focus on some of the bigger cars, including a car that I absolutely love that is hidden in Jeff's secret vault. Let's start in Nihon with the 1984 Honda City Turbo. Now, this car was cool for so many reasons. Back in 1984, I had never seen anything like this. Now, granted, back then I didn't have a driver's license. I couldn't even spell Honda. But here in the US, we had a Tamiya model of this car, which I lovingly built, painted it in red. Mine even had the sunroof, but I digress. This car was the brainchild of Hirotoshi Honda, who was the son of Soshiro Honda. He was also the founder of the tuning firm Mugen. So this was like the hot hatch version of the Honda City, which kind of blew my mind that there was a fast economy car. But you want to see something that's going to blow your mind? One of the options was a scooter in the trunk of the car. So this was the Honda Scooter 90. It was a foot wide, 2 feet tall, and 3 feet long. So the concept was park your car in the city and take your scooter and kind of get wherever you want to go. I want one of these today. And actually, I think you could bring one of these things in under the 25-year rule because they're kind of that old now. Anyway, let's press on. So if you were trying to save money on gas in the 1970s, you traded in your big Chevy or Ford or whatever you had, and you bought a Datsun B210. They were everywhere back then. Now, here's the thing. How many of them do you see today? Really not that many. And there's a good reason why. They all rusted out, specifically back here. But notice, this one is like new in the wrapper, even down to the vinyl. Why don't you guys just soak this one in here, take a breath and look at it, and like really let it wash over you. It's a unique design, and I'm actually going to ask you a question here. What car does this remind you of today or coming? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV, all one word, MotoManTV, all one word. Notice this one even has the honeycomb hubcaps. It's actually part of the Nissan North America Heritage Collection here in Tennessee. Now, let's move back to Honda, Kaijidoshi, which is light car. This is a spec of car in Japan where you don't have to prove that you have a parking spot, hence the size. And really it's a function of the size of the engine, 660cc and below, and obviously the wheelbase. Now, granted, you guys know I love Lotus. I love small cars, but this takes it to a completely different level. Although I would love to drive this thing. Actually, how many of you guys would want to drive this thing? Let me know in the comments below. Now, when we're talking small cars, let's come on over here. Toyota Sports 800. Now, not Kaijidoshi because it has a bigger engine. 790cc. Check this out. When I say bigger engine, really not that much. It is a boxer air-cooled engine, puts out a fire-breathing 45 horsepower. Notice this one has a removable roof here. Timeline-wise, this came out just before the Toyota 2000 GT. Notice the lights even kind of look like it here. And it was produced from 65 to 67. Now, let's head over to Nissan. This is the Fairlader. Does this look like any Fairlady you have seen before? Not really, it doesn't look like a 240 to me. But this really, if you look at the design of this thing, this was early 60s. It looks very similar. Imagine take like a European design, shrink it, and that's kind of what they did, but this one's on a truck chassis, so not the most elegant of driving Datsuns that you've ever seen. This one, it's missing a roof, but it does have the roof frame, the rails here. This one is also part of the Nissan North America Heritage Collection. While we're talking Datsuns, let's go to one you actually know and love pretty well. Now this is the Datsun 1600 Roadster. You probably know this because Peter Brock and John Morton made this thing famous by winning with these things. But what's happening now is a lot of the guys that were, 15 to 20 years old that were watching John and Peter, literally mop the floor with everybody's ass with this car, they now want one of these. So the value of these things are really starting to climb. So I would suggest if you want one, you should probably buy one now. Let's press on. From the small, we'll press on to the weird. This is a 1951 Hoffman. Now, up until this point, I had never seen one of these in person. And notice, it's very wide and it's very short. There's a reason for this. Number one, it's a three-wheeler. And number two, the wheel in the back, the one wheel in the back, that's the one that steers. So this is not like driving a motorcycle, a car, or like a Morgan three-wheeler. It's like driving a forklift. Translated, it breaks every law of physics. Let's press on. So another thing that Jeff and the Lane Motor Museum is well known for are Tatras. Now, Tatras are really interesting if you are into engineering or really the history of cars. Because take a look at this Tatra 97 here. Look at the design specifically. If you could spend some time looking at the engineering, the way it's built, and the fact that it's a 4-cylinder air-cooled engine in the rear kind of reminds you of something. Now, we're going to cover that a little later in this film, but I want to bring up something here. Tatra later on, they got into these bigger cars with air-cooled V8s like the 603 here. Now, if we're looking at this 603, it should look familiar to you. How many of you guys remember Roman from TFL Car? He's been on our show, I've been on his show, he's a good friend of mine. But I have a bone to pick with Roman because Roman, he did something so incredibly cool that would fall under both the headings of car guy cool and father-son bonding experience. Roman, originally from the Czech Republic, went back to the Czech Republic, bought a car almost identical to this, and are you ready for this? He drove it across 2 continents with his son to Pebble Beach, California. And then, what does he do when he gets home to Colorado with it? He sold it. So, if you are angry like me about this, I would like you to let Roman know. And you can do that by tweeting him at TFL Car on Twitter, at TFL Car on Twitter. Let him know that we're all angry for selling the old girl the 603. Looks like a Corvair, but smaller and with Italian coachwork. In reality, what it is a Panhard, and this is one of the last cars the company produced. This was a 1966 model year before Citroen took over the company. And what's really interesting about Panhard is their place in the history of the car world. The company started building cars in 1891, mainly known for luxury cars. But what's really interesting recently, one of their early models, and when I say early, I mean 1898, 1899, it was like a wooden three-wheeler with a bench hanging off the back. It sold for almost $2 million for a car most people outside of the collector car world have never heard of. Now, let's press on to something a little bit more modern. Here we have a 1975 Citroen Gs. What's interesting about this is not that it's a French car in the US, but it shares something with a Mazda RX-7. That is a rotary engine. So back in the 70s, a number of car manufacturers were playing around with the idea of rotary engines. Even Chevrolet displayed a concept car, Corvette, with a rotary engine. But here, this was actually put into production. Let's just say that the engine wasn't very reliable, so much so that Citroen offered to switch out the engines for most of the customers. So very few of them still exist today with the rotary engine that it was born with. This is one of 200 that are still floating around the world with a rotary engine in a Citroen. Now let's go on to something much cooler. Do you guys remember Le Car, or the Renault 5 in Europe? Well, they made the super hot hatch version, and this is This is the R5 Turbo. And basically what this is they switch out the steel body. They got an alloy body with fiberglass fenders. They literally pick the motor up from the front, put it in the back, slap on a turbocharger, 160 horsepower in a lightweight, small car. So this was their rally entry, very successful. And now you see a lot of guys bringing these things over to the US. Love these things. Now you want to see the bookend to this? Clio V6. Like the R5 Turbo, this started out life as a nondescript hatchback, and it had a 4-cylinder transversely mounted engine here. They decided to throw that out. Then they found a Renault Laguna that had a 227 horsepower V6. They pilfered that engine and put it in the rear and drove the rear wheels here. Then they added all this cool bodywork, and they made a total of about 5,000 of these things. 50 grand a copy. Notice this one is right hook. Of the 5,000 they made, 200 of them or so were made as the right-hand drive. So today you guys know BMW as very successful, but that wasn't always the case. Basically in the late 50s they were teetering on bankruptcy, and it was because of cars like this. This originally started life as the 503. This one's one of the nicest 3200S's I've ever seen. And you look at a car like this and you truly see German craftsmanship. I mean, you open the door of this thing and I don't even have to slam it and there's a thunk. You look at the woodwork on the inside, the leatherwork, truly stunning. A porcelain steering wheel, which I'd like to say shares with the 507. But Mercedes of the day sold rings around this car. And that's kind of why they were teetering on bankruptcy. That was until Herbert Quandt came and bought controlling interest of the company. And they are still the family that owns the largest share of BMW today. But that was kind of like the turning point, because if you know your BMW history, it was after this and the 507. 507 stunning, but not a commercial success, and now worth a lot of money, by the way. That's when they went to the direction of their own tune, which was sports sedans, and the rest is history with 2002s and now 3 Series. That strategy proved to be incredibly successful, and other car companies like NSU jumped on the bandwagon. Does this car look very familiar to you? That's because you know it now as Audi today. Now, Jeff has done something really interesting here. He's lined up Western European cars next to Eastern European cars. Here we have another Tatra. Now, I promised to come back to this with you guys, and here's why. Take a look at this car, the specific design, the very aerodynamic design, and the rear engine air-cooled car. Now come on over here. We've got a Mercedes-Benz that is, granted it's a little more stodgy, but it still has more of a bubble shape and a rear engine for a Mercedes from the 30s. Then take a look at this car over here. This is a Hanomag. Once again, aerodynamic shape, but this one has a front engine. This is an IFA, very aerodynamic shape, also from the 30s, front engine, but a complete and utter ripoff of DKV. Now, do any of these cars look familiar to you? Does the concept of a Tatra with an aerodynamic shape and an air-cooled rear engine sound familiar to you? Now, the history goes of Tatra that you look at what Tatra was doing in the time they were doing it, and then you look at what Volkswagen was doing in the time they were doing it. Very fishy in how that came about. So much so, there were lawsuits, there were settlements, there were agreements. Now Tatra still exists today and they make heavy trucks, and I think you guys know what these guys are doing today. And if you really, just as a footnote of this, look at this design. Even here in America, we were doing this in the 30s. Remember the Chrysler Airflow? So we promised to show you a car in Jeff's secret vault, and of course we stumble on yet another Tatra. But check this out, an Audi Coupe, nicest one I've ever seen. It's not a Quattro, but here's the story. It was donated to the museum by the family who bought the car new. It was restored by its original owner. Kids didn't want it, so they donated it to the museum under the provision it was never going to be sold. So here it is. Renault Alpine. You got a Citroen here, an odd-looking Volvo, a military vehicle, and then check this out. Lancia Delta Integrale. Now I asked you guys via social media what guest who has been on our show bought one of these just recently, like 2 weeks ago. The answer is Cadillac design director, Bob Beneface. He bought one from the UK. It's super well sorted. It's like in great condition. He is going to bring it on the show, so we are going to drive it together. I'm very much looking forward to that. Other than that, I hate him for getting one before me. Now let's press on. This car that we're going to see is something I fell in love with back, man, I think I was not even 10 years old. My next door neighbor, Harry, his mother bought one new. Oh, check this out. A Trabant, another Beetle, but the piece de resistance, my favorite car of the collection, the wedge-shaped Triumph. And this ain't no V6 TR7. My friends, that is an 81 TR8 with the Buick Rover V8 with a fire-breathing 130 horsepower in carbureted trim. But if you upgraded to fuel injection spec, you got an additional 7 horsepower. This one is fitted with the tartan interior and the British racing green. Actually, this is almost identical to what my friend's mother had. And when I got to ride in this thing, man, I thought it was the most exotic. Or you could have told me this thing was an Aston Martin, and I would have believed it. So let's move on from British roadsters to something just a wee bit larger. So you guys into military vehicles like Jeeps, troop transports, tanks, that kind of stuff. Well, there's really no way to describe this, so let's see something that I've never seen before, and that would be the Lark Lx. Now let's put this into perspective. I am 6 feet tall. Look at the size of that thing. Basically, it's like a hull with 4 huge wheels, 4-wheel steer, 4 diesel engines, and then there's like a loading dock up in the front that doubles as a ramp to drive vehicles up inside the cargo bay. And basically, the height of that, you see the 0 down to the 5, that's about the depth of the load floor. And that thing was used in the military to move vehicles, troops, structures. This one in particular, Jeff found on eBay, and it was being used to take raw materials for a home builder from the mainland to Barbados. So Jeff bought it and then had it transported via water to Nashville, and then he got special permits to drive it from the port of Nashville to here in the middle of the night. That definitely proved to be interesting. Now, Jeff, he's got this party trick he likes to do where he takes cars he no longer wants and puts them underneath the wheel of his largest plaything. And this is what happens. Now, did you really think we were going to come to a classic car museum and me not show you a Lotus? Well, here we have 2. One of my favorite color, an Elan, and then here we have a Type 74, better known as a Europa. Now, I'm not showing you these cars because they are Lotus. I saved these for the last because there is an incredible story behind this one here. I am proud to say that I'm a car guy. Not because I love cars, not because my rocket scientist father loved cars, but because we're kind of like a family. And this proves it. The man that owned this car was diagnosed terminally ill. And when he was diagnosed, it was that typical story. You're going to get around to that project car in the garage, right? Well, here he was, and he didn't have time left. He didn't have time to put his car back together. So a friend of his called a friend of his and called a friend of his who called the Lane Museum, and they told him the story. Here's a guy that just wants to drive his car one more time. So the Lane went, got the car, got it back into running condition, and then took the owner, and he was able to drive his car one last time on a track day, his beloved Lotus. Didn't look like this at this point. But then he was happy that he got to drive his car. The Lane went above and beyond, took the car back after the track day, painted it, restored it to the condition you see today. And then at that point, he took a real turn for the worse, was in hospice, and the Lane brought the car to the man in the parking lot. He looked out his window, saw the car, and passed later that day.